Greetings and welcome to this presentation on ableism in vegan and animal rights messaging. I'm using slides today because I know that some people learn better when they at least see some of the words visually. But if you're just listening, that's okay, because I'm going to make sure I say everything that is on the slides. So I promise you won't miss anything. On the slide right now, we've got some headlines of things that vegans tend to say, and the title of this presentation. I also want you to know, because some of this presentation might be challenging. So I want you to know that I'm assuming you're here tonight or watching the video later because you want to do good in the world. Um, and so it's okay if it turns out that you learn here that maybe you've made a mistake at one point or another in your advocacy career, because we all make mistakes, and I will probably make some myself tonight. Who am I? I am Patrice Jones, and I am one of the co-founders of Vine Sanctuary, which is the sponsor of tonight's event. Now, if you've heard of Vine Sanctuary before, then you know that we're an LGBTQ-led refuge for farmed animals that works for social and environmental justice as well as for animal liberation. Hundreds of animals live at the sanctuary, including 30 or 40 cows, dozens of goats and sheep, literally hundreds of birds, including chickens and goats and chickens and geese and turkeys and pigeons. And I'm sure I'm forgetting many. We run several humane education programs, including a virtual humane education program that goes out to elementary school students. And we're just about to launch a new virtual education program going out to middle school students. Shout out to Michelle and the team of volunteers who handles all of that. We also have a book club that you can learn about and join on our website. This educational event, along with all of our educational events, is sponsored in part by Dr. Bronner's Magic Soap, and we are super grateful to them for that support. However, like every other sanctuary these days, we are struggling to pay the bills because of a combination of inflation and reduced donations by people who are themselves in some economic distress. So, while nobody is obliged to pay for any of our educational programming, if you feel moved to make a donation tonight or later, we would love that and be so grateful for it. These are the colors of the disability pride flag. You see green and blue and white and yellow and red. Um, One thing you might not know about Vine Sanctuary is that uh, myself and Miriam Jones, the other co-founder of the sanctuary, actually met in the context of a disability rights struggle. We're both people with disabilities ourselves, um, and we never would have met if it weren't for a struggle for housing for people with psychiatric disabilities. So, literally, there would not be a Vine Sanctuary if it weren't for the disability rights movement. A majority of our staff members are people with disabilities, and in 2024, we won a Spirit of the ADA award from the Vermont Governor's Committee on the Employment of People with Disabilities. Now, check it out. One, according to the CDC, 1 in 4 people in the United States are people with disabilities. Add in caregivers, parents, siblings of people with disabilities, and you probably got a majority of people who, in some way or another, very much care about people with disabilities, about ableism, about fair treatment of people with disabilities, and are sensitive to insults of people with disabilities. Disability is something that in some ways crosses all boundaries, but in other ways is sadly biased. Anybody at all can become disabled anytime due to a sudden injury, an accident, an illness of some kind. But people who are marginalized or oppressed in some way are much more likely than others to become disabled and have a much harder time accessing care. People who live, uh, people who are living in poverty, or even working class folks, people of color, with indigenous and black folks being especially likely to become disabled. Um, so uh, it's important to remember that if you're alienating people with disabilities, one, you're alienated a huge swath of the population, but you're especially alienating people who have been marginalized in other ways. This is just the beginning. So, this is just the beginning in the sense that this is at the last event of our 2026 Disability Pride Month events, but it's the first of a series of events intended to help the vegan and animal rights movements become less ableist, more inclusive, and more accessible. Despite the number of people with disabilities we've just discussed, the vegan and animal rights movement typically make no effort at all to reach people with disabilities, and in fact, often do or say things that, inadvertently or not, insult or alienate people with disabilities. So there's a lot of work to do. And again, this is just the beginning. The focus of this presentation is on accidental ableism in vegan and animal rights messaging. There's so much more we need to be talking about collectively, making our organizations, whether they be grassroots organizations or huge organizations with lots of paid staff, more accessible and more inclusive, making our events more accessible and inclusive, making our websites more accessible and inclusive. Um, so those will be the focus of future events. Please make sure you sign up for the Vine Web's newsletter so that you'll get announcements for those events. And if you are a representative of an organization that would like to do better in this realm, and might like to consult with us about that, whether have us do a presentation for you or come and do an accessibility audit for you, then contact us. Here's the word easy, because we're going to do the easiest things first. And we're going to start with the easiest things to do or not do, and then move on to some much more tricky considerations. And then To end on an upbeat note, we're going to do a little bit of a preview of some of the fabulous things that the vegan and animal rights movements can learn from the disability rights movement. Easiest thing to do? Avoid ableist phrases, as this slide says. And here we see some speech balloons that say things like crazy, dumb, crippled, insane, addict, lame. Whoo! So many of these are used so commonly, and not just by people who are commenting on our posts. Words like crazy and dumb do end up in some of the social media posts that vegan and animal rights activists make, and in speeches and in writing. And so the easiest thing to do is quit doing that. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple of them, but there are so many. Luckily, this is something that we've been dealing with for decades. And so there are lots and lots of online guides to avoiding ableist phrases, any of which you're welcome to consult. But what we did was compile a master list from, I think it's over 10, 15, 18 different credible websites making suggestions for things to say instead of common ableist phrases. So I think that Michelle should have just shared that PDF with you, and she'll also share a link to where the PDF lives online. And that alone should be worth the price of the ticket to this event, which was, of course, free. Um, you won't want to read it now, but really read that, and you're going to go a long way toward avoiding ableist phrases. Now, a couple that I've heard um, in the vegan and animal rights realm is one is the common uh, uh, habit of referring to people or ideas as dumb. Now, this whole tendency is not a tendency in our particular world. It's a tendency in the wider world, particularly in the United States right now, where people fling accusations of unintelligence at their rivals in any way. And there are whole books on the ableism implicit in talking about intelligence in this kind of way. But what I want to talk about a little is just the word dumb. So the word dumb is, if you don't know, is what was used to describe people who are nonverbal, people who communicate through sign language or other means other than spoken or written words. And at the time it was used, there was also a presumption that such people were not intelligent, and so it has this double whammy effect, and it reverberates still for people with cognitive disabilities, for people with communicative disabilities, and it's pretty easy to just say something like unwise or uninformed or whatever it is that you really think rather than that slur. Same for crazy, insane, psycho, schizo, any of the phrases that people use. Now, sometimes people use them in referring to a person, sometimes they use them in referring to an idea, sometimes they use them in referring to a situation. If you're using it in reference to a person, oh my goodness, don't. Um, if you're talking about someone with a psychiatric disability and you have some need to share that fact, then say psychiatric disability. Um, if you're thinking about an idea, well, say it's nonsensical or irrational. These are the kinds of ideas you'll get in the PDF. If you're talking about an atmosphere that's hectic, then say it's hectic rather than saying it's crazy. Um, the point is that instead of using this metaphor, this lazy metaphor, you're going to try and say what you actually mean. Another one that's not in the PDF, but that comes up in vegan advocacy is this use of the word clean to refer to food. And I would just like people to be aware that, so for people with substance abuse disorders who are said uh, saying that they're clean instead of saying that they're in recovery, suggest that they were dirty before. And dirty is one of those terms that's been flung at all sorts of marginalized groups over the centuries. So honestly, I have no idea what people mean when they talk about clean eating. But I would encourage them to just say what they mean, which brings us to the bonus. The bonus here is that avoiding ableist metaphors means thinking and speaking more clearly, taking the time to think, what do I really mean here when I'm about to say crazy? What do I really mean here when I'm about to say lame? Forces you to clarify your thinking and improve, whether it's speech or writing, the clarity of your communication. So I hope that everybody will uh, do their best to avoid ableist language in their casual conversation, as well as in any messaging they might do for vegan or animal rights organizations. And I hope that we all can consider that a challenge to think and speak more clearly rather than as some sort of onerous or unfair burden. Let's think of it as an opportunity to clarify and sharpen our own thinking and speaking. Okay, here's the next easy thing. Don't quote Peter Singer. And if you don't know what he looks like, here's a picture of him. Now, I'm going to tell you why in a minute, but I want to highlight why this is in the easy section. It's very, very easy not to quote Peter Singer. There is literally not a thing he says that someone else hasn't also said, or that you couldn't say yourself putting it into your own words. It is very, very, very easy to avoid quoting Peter Singer. If we could all do that, we would go a really long way. And I'll explain why now. Inside the AR movement, Peter Singer is famous as the writer of Animal Liberation. Outside the vegan and animal rights movement, Peter Singer is most famous as a notorious, infamous promoter of eugenics. I want to read to you a few quotes because I want you to understand the gravity of this situation. Here's one quote. When the death of a disabled infant will lead to the birth of another infant with better prospects of a happy life, it would, according to the total view, be right to kill him. Here's another quote from his book, Practical Ethics, which was originally printed in 1979, but has been reprinted and never amended. Defective infants lack, he says, these qualities that he had mentioned above. Those are rationality, autonomy, and self-consciousness. Quote, killing them, therefore, cannot be equated with killing normal human beings or any other self-conscious beings. Now, if you're thinking, okay, but he wrote that in 1979, fact of the matter is, there have been countless events at universities where he defends these ideas, published pieces where people with disabilities challenge him on these ideas, and he insists that he is correct. And as recently as 2023, he said, I still think there are cases where parents should have the option of ending the life of their severely disabled infant. So if you quote Peter Singer, if you cite Peter Singer, then you're gonna be committing ableism by association. Because if you quote a philosopher, then that means you endorse his philosophy. If you're one of the people in the animal rights movement who knows this about him, but has continued to cite him, I would just encourage you to wonder why you so easily set aside such a blatantly eugenicist point of view. Now, if you're thinking, but this is not something that people know about him, maybe because you didn't know it about him, because nobody in the animal rights movement told you until me. Here's a book published in 2020. It's probably the most well-read book for the general public about disability. It's called Disability Visibility. It's edited by the late Alice Wong. There's a picture of the cover here on the slide. The very first chapter of this book focuses on Peter Singer's persistent argument that some disabled lives are not worth living and that killing some disabled infants would reduce suffering and increase happiness. People know this about Peter Singer. And we'll assume that you know it too, and will seriously wonder what's going on if you cite him as some kind of authority. Now, all of this was under easy because it's really easy not to quote somebody. I'm going to step aside from easy for just 1 second, 2 slides, and remind you that this way of thinking, Peter Singer's way of thinking, has harmed animals as well. Here's a picture of my book, The Oxen at the Intersection, which is about a situation in which Lou the ox was deemed unworthy of life after a disabling injury. His captors considered it more ethical to make him into hamburgers to be enjoyed by many than to send him to a sanctuary to use resources and receive care. Oh, another easy thing you can do is read that book, which includes a whole chapter on the linkages between ableism and speciesism. Finally, before we move off of Peter Singer, I do believe that Singer's utilitarian reasoning leads directly to such ableist and speciesist conclusions. And so, just as a favor, if there's anybody here who's feeling a little bit shook, because they have been a fan of Peter Singer, but now think, uh-oh, maybe I want to not just not quote him, but rethink my embrace of his way of thinking. A good book to start with is called The Good It Promises, the Harm It Does. Um, Critical Essays on Effective Altruism, edited by Carol Adams, Alice Clary, and Laurie Gruen. And there's a photo of that book cover on this slide. Okay, I'm not going to talk about him anymore. And you can't see it, but there's a cat climbing on me, which is making it tricky for me to give this presentation. And here this slide says tricky. Why? Because there are a lot of topics that vegan and animal rights activists, advocates do need to talk about, but can lead to some unintended consequences. So it gets a little trickier because it's not just don't say this or do say that instead, but we're actually going to have to think a little bit about how to navigate, how to talk about certain topics without accidentally veering into overt or implicit ableism. Here are the potential pitfalls, or at least some of the potential pitfalls: health, fitness, weight, animal abilities, and it says ease here, but what I'm talking about is the alleged easiness of veganism. For each of these, there are good reasons. Well, except for maybe weight, there are good reasons for vegans, people who are promoting veganism, or people who are promoting animal rights or animal liberation, to have some conversations about these things. But there are ways of talking about these things that can veer into ableism. So let's go. Health. All right, so if only because so many people say veganism is unhealthy, it's absolutely necessary to talk about the health benefits of veganism, for at least some of us to be talking about that pretty regularly. But it's pretty easy. Here we have two things listed. Avoid overselling health benefits of veganism and avoid blaming or seeming to blame people for their own illnesses and disabilities. So let's talk about that last one first. Um, it's pretty easy when you're talking about diet as a key to health, to inadvertently suggest that people who are in poor health are responsible for that situation, because if they just chose to eat better, they wouldn't have these problems. This can be linked, so obviously we want to avoid that. And this can be linked sometimes to overselling the health benefits of veganism. Just for the record, there's another cat here, and they are swatting at me as I try to talk to you. Um, the You don't need me, if you're here in this event, then you don't need me to tell you about the many health benefits of veganism, including um, uh, 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 blood pressure, heart disease, chance of catching various cancers. Oh my gosh, type 2 diabetes, which in some cases can be ameliorated entirely with a vegan diet. Um, but I have heard so many vegans suggest that if you were only vegan, then your blood pressure will go down. Or if you were only vegan, then your type 1 diabetes would go away. So a good rule of thumb here is to be super careful in how you phrase anything you say about the health benefits of veganism. And then I want to suggest two organizations that do a decent job of this. If you're talking about known health benefits of vegan diets, I would look to the Physicians Committee on Responsible Medicine. Um, their website typically, now I haven't read the whole thing, so I could be making a mistake right now. But for the most part, these are medical professionals who are stating the facts and therefore not overstating the benefits. So looking at how they say things can be useful. Another organization, one organization that's done very well at promoting veganism within low-income communities of color is the Afro-Vegan Society, led by my friend Brenda Sanders. I'd have a look at their social medias uh, because there are two important points here. One, there's never a hint of blaming people for their current diets or for their health issues. And then, secondly, they really care about the health of folks they're talking to. What I'm trying to say here is that if you talk about health and veganism from a perspective of truly caring about this person or that group of people's health, then you won't be blameful and you won't oversell. So, and if you don't really care, then maybe health isn't one of the things you should be talking about. Ooh, fitness. Okay, so here's the thing. It's absolutely the case that a lot of people, especially a lot of men, uh, denigrate veganism as incompatible with strength, incompatible with fitness, with athletic achievement, and then on the flip side, there are quite a few athletes who are succeeding as vegans, who switched over to veganism and saw their performance improve. And so it makes sense for some people, some vegan advocates, to counter those anti-vegan arguments by reference to people who are clearly um, very successful in athletics or some other field. Um, but over time, this has tended to lead within veganism to a cult almost of a certain kind of fitness, a kind of fitness that's very thin and visibly muscular and not at all realistic in terms of what fitness actually looks like for people with different body types, different disabilities, So here on the slide, it says, remember that fitness is always relative. It says, avoid glorification of masculine muscularity, and don't suggest or assume that fit equals thin. I was really torn on this. Now we've switched over to a slide that says weight. It says, don't assume weight loss as a goal, don't glorify thinness, be mindful of eating disorders, shut down any fat shaming, and include all body types in images. Why was tricky? All of that is important. And so that's why this slide is here. I worried about including it in the tricky section because I'm not sure that talking about weight is ever actually necessary. Um, so I would be inclined to suggest not talking about weight. But if for some reason you do, then be mindful that one disability is eating disorders. And whether we want it to be true or not, some people with anorexia or other eating disorders do sometimes turn to veganism as part of their disorder. We could help that by not promoting veganism as a way to reach thinness. And we don't have to promote veganism as a way to reach thinness if we're not glorifying thinness. What we could do instead is make sure we include all sorts of body types and abilities in any images we use of veganisms or how people should look. Oh, and I put shut down any fat shaming on this slide, but it goes more generally. For those of us who are in organizations that have social media presences, then we have some obligation to attend to not only the things we are saying, but the things that people are saying on the comments to our posts. And so I'd like you to shut down any fat shaming, but I'd also like you to shut down any use of any ableist language in the comments that pop up on your posts. Uh, and you can decide for yourself whether you just want to delete the comment or whether you actually want to engage the person. But don't let ugly ableist language live on comments on your social media posts. Okay, animal abilities. We haven't talked much. We've been talking a lot about veganism, but now we're going to talking about animal abilities. Now, here's the thing. There's all kind of unfair, inaccurate, false things that people believe about animal abilities. People think that animals don't think or can't remember or don't use language, etc., etc., etc. And so many people find it not only acceptable but important to challenge those false statements about animal abilities. But here's the problem with, sorry, cat is getting in the way again. Here's the problem with saying chickens can do this, that, or the other, so don't eat them. Why? Because we're suggesting that if they didn't have those abilities, it would be okay. Probably after God told us we could do whatever we want to them, the most commonly held reason that people feel like it's okay to do all of the terrible things that humans do to animals is because they believe that humans are superior. And they believe that humans are superior because humans have particular abilities that other animals don't have: consciousness, reasoning, tool use, language. Now, as we've just mentioned, it's not true that other animals don't have those abilities. And so one way to argue back is to say, well, but they do have those abilities. But that doesn't touch the structure of the argument. The structure of the argument is that um, rights or care or moral worth depend on having rationality or language use or some other ability. And as I heard a disability rights activist once say, that's not that's not just like ableism. That is ableism. So the slide says avoid suggesting that it's okay to withhold rights or care from those who don't have whatever ability you are mentioning. Also says that you could highlight amazing abilities that no humans have, just because I love to do that when I'm talking. Um, Mention that dolphins have built-in sonar and wonder if they should have more rights than us because of it. Um, but uh, but on the one hand, it sounds tricky. Oh, how can I talk about uh, these lies about animal abilities without veering into the idea that abilities lead to rights or care? But actually, once you really get it, once you really set aside any belief that you have that only those who can speak or only those who can think in certain ways or only those who can do certain things are worthy of rights or care, then you'll find ways to talk about the fabulous abilities of non-human animals without ever suggesting that those abilities are the reasons why we should care about them or why they deserve not to be killed or incarcerated for life. Okay, now we got to go talk about, is it easy to be vegan? Again, we've got a lot of reasons to suggest that it's not difficult to be vegan, right? We've all heard people who absolutely have the wherewithal to go vegan say, oh, I could never go vegan. Oh, it's too hard, right? So, of course, people want to say it's easy to be vegan, but it's not so easy for some people, for many people, and that includes many people with disabilities. Um, whether because of their disabilities or because of their membership in marginalized groups that tend to have more disabilities. Many people with disabilities are low income, no income, barely scraping by. So remember income disparities when you're talking about how easy it is to be vegan. Remember food access disparities. Now, you've probably already heard, there's neighborhoods where it's very hard to gain access to affordable vegan food. Sure. If you make a living wage and you can access a grocery store where you can get bulk beans, bulk rice, fresh produce in season and buy the stuff that's cheap because it's in season, yeah, that's pretty easy. It's affordable. It's cheap to be vegan in that case. But if you don't live near a grocery store and there isn't a place, you know, anywhere near you where you can buy those things and you don't have much money either, then you're dependent often on whatever is around. Now, add in for many people with disabilities, it's hard enough uh, for a person who doesn't have a mobility disability to take the bus to a grocery store and then haul home bags of groceries. I've done it, it's not easy. Um, but add in a mobility disability and it's impossible. So some people with disabilities may have to rely on other people to get their groceries. Next, it says, remember real food intolerances. Yes, yes, yes. We all have met people who, in bad faith, claim that they can't be vegan because some doctor told them they needed some meat, or they took a test that says they're this blood type and they need to eat the paleo diet. But many people have real food intolerances that make it very difficult. I have a friend who is both has celiac disease and is allergic to soy. It is very tricky and difficult for her to be vegan. She is, but if she was somebody who lived in a different place or had a lower income, I'm not sure she'd be able to. Next, don't assume everybody has the time or ability to cook. Lots and lots of low income and working class folk have little time. If you're disabled, there's a whole thing called crip time. Um, a whole Go look it up about how much time it takes to be disabled, how much time you spend on the phone with with uh, doctors and how much time extra certain things take. So don't assume everybody has the time or ability to cook. And then finally, remember the original definition of ethical veganism, which is on the next slide. Now check it. The man who coined the phrase veganism, the very first definition was just about a vegetarian diet that didn't include any animal products at all. But then the Vegan Society wanted to change the definition to include other forms of animal exploitation and not focus only on diet. And so here's the definition that the Vegan Society adopted in 1951. A philosophy and way of life which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. That's again the Vegan Society 1951. And I added the emphasis on as far as is possible and practicable. Now check it. I don't care how vegan you are. There's some things you do that harm animals. There's literally no way to entirely avoid it unless I don't even know how you could do it. I'm sure that whatever data centers are powering this Zoom are harming some animals. I know very well from gardening that growing Even growing vegetables veganically might lead you to when you're digging out the soil, kill insects or disturb the homes of moles. Um, so let's all just be mindful of this, and understand that there are many people who are, because of their disability, um, unable to be as vegan as they would like to be. But that doesn't make them any less vegan. Um, and it's certainly not people who we should be excluding in any way. Again, this is just the beginning. The focus today has been on our messaging and um, and how we can do it differently. Oh, oh, I just realized that I also meant to say very few of us don't take medicine, um, given that it's been tested on animals. I know that some vegans do, but most of us take the medicine we're prescribed, even though we know. Um, So anyway, this is just the beginning. There's more to come, including right now. Um, but I just want to say again, this was on messaging. We still need to think about how can we make our organizations more inclusive and accessible? How can we make our events more inclusive and accessible? Our websites. Um, there's so much that the vegan and animal rights movements need to do to first off just avoid insulting or alienating people with disabilities and those who love them, but also really joining with the disability rights movement in struggling for a better world for everybody. And in that vein, I want to give you a preview of lessons that we all could learn from the disability rights movement. Probably the most important slogan of the disability rights movement is nothing about us without us. So, and here we see a circle of people, and we also see a circle of animals. Or rather, humans and non-human animals are the two circles. Nothing about us without us means um, was a pushback against the long-standing practice of other people making decisions about what should happen to people with disabilities. The disability rights movement says, nah, we need to be in those discussions, helping to decide the course of our lives. Um, that's applicable to our movements as well, in terms of making sure that people with disabilities are among us. And because many of us certainly are, also feel free to claim their disabilities. But here at Vine, we take that and we say, well, doesn't that also apply to animals? How come we feel so comfortable deciding what's going to happen to them, deciding what the priorities of the animal rights movement should be, deciding all sorts of things about non-human animals? Uh, and so we make an effort. I mean, obviously, we don't, lots of them understand a lot of our language. We're not very good at all at understanding theirs, but check it if you pay attention. There's a lot that you can learn from nonverbal communication from both human and non-human animals. So we try to make sure we're literally in the company of animals when we're making decisions about them. But we also really hope that the movement will take that principle from disability rights and really think about, well, how could we consult non-human animals about what we're doing allegedly on their behalf when we're claiming to speak for them? How careful are we being about making sure that what we say cows want really is what cows want? That's just something to think about, and will be the subject of a future presentation. Avoiding inspiration porn is another concept from disability rights that I think it could be important to uh, the animal rights movement. Now, inspiration porn is when people without disabilities get all weepy-eyed about some achievement of a person with a disability. Um, but you know what? That admiration is often tinged with pity and tends to go along with a kind of objectification, tends to flatten the person into their achievement in overcoming their disability when that's not maybe how they think about it at all, and also tends to obscure the reasons for disabilities. I put up this photo of Kanga, a sheep, with two of her emu companions, just because, I know that some people looking at that photo might feel that sort of admiration tinged with pity for her. But you know what? That's not, I don't think that's what she would have wanted you to feel at all. Like that day, she wasn't thinking, oh, I'm overcoming adversity by using a wheelchair. Nah, she was looking at the autumn leaves and she was avoiding the emus who can sometimes be a little troublesome to sheep. And it looks like she was on her way to one of her many friends. So, think about uh, the ways that messages that are meant to uplift animals might sometimes uh, have the opposite effect. A super important uh, principle of disability rights is the presumption of competence. Perhaps you can imagine a person in a wheelchair who's just navigating her life, and then here comes some guy, grabs the wheelchair, and is like, I'll help you. She didn't ask for his help. She didn't want his help. That might seem like a minor annoyance, but a lot of times people with disabilities historically, less so today, but it's not all gone, have been considered incompetent to make decisions about their own lives, have been considered to be uh, perpetual juveniles, always because they need some help with mobility, not fully adult, or because they need some help with some other aspect of daily life, somehow just generally incompetent. I added age appropriate here because I really want to focus on this being treated as a perpetual juvenile. Obviously, this is something that we don't want to do to any people with disabilities in our lives. But I want you to notice that this is something that people do to non-human animals all the time, presuming that even though they are adults, we're better positioned than they are to make decisions about their lives. This is reflected in the way we talk about animals, calling them babies or girls or boys. I don't know how many times we've posted a photo on social media of an elder cow or goat or sheep and said, this person is an elder, this person has this role in their community. Other animals look up to them. We look up to them. And then the comments will be, pretty boy, handsome girl, what a sweet baby. So I would encourage you, if you're in the habit of juvenilizing adult animals, to do what we do and adopt the disability rights principle of a presumption of competence when interacting with non-human animals in your life. And there are lots more intersections between uh, disability, what people with disabilities experience or have experienced, and what animals experience. Being incarcerated for life, being put on display, being used as objects of experiments, being deprived of reproductive freedom by being sterilized without consent, being silenced, having your way of communicating assumed to be inferior or non-existent, being presumed to be unintelligent. For all of these, then we're back to this idea that rights are dependent on abilities. That's a key component of ableism and also a key component of speciesism. And that's why we really need to make alliances with people with disabilities and the disability rights movement. So, hoping that we'll be able to do it, we'll end on the happy note of two other really important principles from disability rights: interdependence and mutual aid. Look, in Western culture, and especially in US culture, independence is highly valued. And that's one reason why people with disabilities, who have to rely on other people sometimes, are looked down upon. But people with disabilities know that none of us are independent. We're all interdependent. We all rely on other people. And if we're going to take an eco-feminist or animal rights spin on it, then we're all also dependent on the larger than human world. We couldn't breathe without trees. We couldn't eat without soil and all the amazing underground animals who create the soil out of dead matter. The disability rights movement not only recognizes but cherishes interdependence, centers their worldview on interdependence. And that means a lot less competition between activists or organizations, and a lot more mutual aid, helping each other out, understanding that each of us has strengths, each of us has weaknesses. We all have dependencies on others, and we all have ways that we can help others. And the more that we understand that, then the more that we can work together to bring about a world of more peace, more justice, more equity, more freedom, more care for everybody. Thank you for sitting through this whole presentation. In a minute, I'm going to end the recording so we can have some discussion, but I want to make sure to thank everybody who is involved. I want to again thank Dr. Bronner Magic Soap for sponsoring in part our educational events. I want to thank all of the donors who make the sanctuary possible. I want to thank all of the people with disabilities with whom we've conversed or who are part of our extended community. And I want to send a very belated shout out to the late Verna Spaeth, who was the disability rights activist who brought me into the disability rights movement back when she was a vegan, but I wasn't yet. Thanks again.